Oh, that's not good anymore. Oh, that coffee's not good. Today on Questions, let's actually talk about creationism versus evolution, but like, actually this time. Hey everybody, welcome to Questions. I'm Brandon Johnson, and this is a series where you have questions, be it on theology, faith, religion, spirituality, philosophy, life, death, meaning, or essentially how to be human, and we have answers, albeit probably unsatisfactory ones. So our question for today is actually going to be 2 for the price of 1. There were 2 questions that I thought worked really well together, and so I thought I would read both of them to you, and then my answer would kind of flow from one to the other narratively. So the first question is, if we evolved from apes, at what point did God touch animals and give it a soul? Which I think this question actually has a lot of overlap from the last questions video. And if I had been thinking, I maybe would have linked those 2 questions together last week, but as it is, I'm going to be linking it with the next question, which the next question is, in your creationism versus evolution video, which was last week's video, you talk about God intervening with humanity for the first time with Abraham and how that idea fits into Scripture. But what about Adam and Eve? Or anything else that happens in the beginning of Genesis? If it's literal, that's a hard argument for evolution. So, evolution versus creationism, the 2 ideas kind of seem opposed to each other, and for a long time, they kind of have been. There are actually a number of faith traditions that believe in a higher power or powers that created the whole universe and have no problem with the idea of evolution. And the fact of the matter is that the 2 ideas don't have to be opposed to each other in Christianity either, necessarily. Like, if we take the scriptures as being truthful, they say that God is all-powerful, and now, yeah, that comes with a caveat that we talked about in previous videos about talking about God being all-powerful, all-loving, all-knowing. But if God is all-powerful, or if God can do all things that are possible to do, then God could have created humanity and developed the universe in an evolutionary manner. And I know, believe me, I know. The fact of the matter is that if you are a die-hard evolutionist or creationist, this answer is going to piss you off. Every time I say this sentence, someone gets mad at me. Because if you're a hardcore creationist, you want to shove the creation poem in the face of my face. Please stop acting like I have never read the first 3 chapters of the Bible. I have. I promise I have. But likewise, if you're a hardcore evolutionist, I also understand the frustration because, what a cop-out answer. Oh, God can do anything? That's your answer for everything. But, of course it is. I'm not saying this to try and, checkmate any hardcore evolutionists. I don't think that this is going to, usurp your belief in science or anything. It is a weak argument from a debate standpoint. If you have over 100 years of scientists and academics with all this research and all this fact on your side to show proof of evolution, and I'm just well, God can do anything, that's not going to win me any points in a debate. Obviously, I'm not trying to say any of this to convince you that this idea is right over yours. But if you believe in some form of a higher power, the divine, the source, the spark, the engine, the universe, the thing behind all things, and you believe that God has the ability to create the whole of creation in 7 literal 24-hour periods, then you also have to admit that God could have the power to develop everything in the universe at a much slower pace. If he could create a full-fledged man in a day, he could create that same man over the course of a couple billion years. Logically, you have to say that is possible. Because if God can do all things, which is what Scripture says, then you have to admit that God could do this. Now, on the other side, in terms of evolution, if you are a die-hard, true blue evolutionist, then you know that evolution is considered in the scientific community as both fact and theory. Now, we don't have time to read the entire Wikipedia article on evolution as fact and theory. You can always read it for yourselves when you have time. But if you are truly a believer in evolution, you know that it can't be seen as full fact because simply there are holes in the process that scientists have yet to be able to confirm or prove as fact. Now, those who read or study evolution, You probably know that when looking at the timeline of the formation of the universe, the thing that hardcore creationists cling to is how do you prove the Big Bang happened the way it happened? If the Big Bang was some sort of expulsory moment in time when all the atoms that make up the entirety of the universe were propelled outward and were forced together and they came apart and they changed and grew and formed and evolved over billions and billions of years, and if scientists tell us that everything came from something before it, if there's a process to everything, then where did the materials that were present in the Big Bang come from? That's what creationists will always say when arguing with evolutionists. If everything comes from something, then where did the first things come from? God! And obviously, there are arguments that can be made against that. But those arguments are still based on theories, which means you can't prove them. But scientists believe in those theories and have faith that one day they will be proven. But the point I'm making is that God or a higher power or some sort of supernatural being, the thing behind all things, they fit into the gaps that scientists have yet to answer in the Big Bang and the evolution of the universe. But make no mistake, I'm not saying that God fits into the holes like some sort of puzzle piece. Like the clues that we get from God are so precise that we're like, it's a perfect answer. God did the Big Bang and we can see that here and here and here. Like, no, like this isn't a conspiratorial thing where a light bulb goes off and we're like, it fits! Like God fits into the Big Bang and the evolution of the universe like a sledgehammer. Because if we believe that God can do all things that are possible to do, then there's no argument that could be made to convince anyone that God couldn't do this. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like having an argument with a 3-year-old. Like, the logic and reason aren't going to win. Anything you say to them, it's just going to be like, well, God can do anything! And the same can be said of macro-human evolution. There are gaps in the timeline of human evolution, and scientists would like to say that, like, you know, we have 1 and we have 3, so we know that 2 exists. Because you look at 1 and you look at 3 and you see that there's going to be a 2 in between them, bridging that gap. But like once again, using the 3-year-old argument, if God can do all things, then there's no argument that can beat the idea that God could have created humans through evolution. So the question then of when did God touch animals and give them a soul and make them into human beings as we would recognize them, my answer would simply be, I have no idea. But I would also say that scientists don't know. You know, like at a certain point in the evolutionary timeline, pre-humans started doing things that even the most advanced animals today still haven't even gotten close to. And so like, I would say that sometime around that period, that's around the time that God would have touched them and given them like the breath of life, as it were. But if like the most studious, smart, advanced scientists who've spent their whole life studying this can't agree on when exactly that happened, then I have no right to say when God potentially did it. So like, let's move on to the second question. If I'm arguing that the first time God intervened with humanity was Abraham, aren't I ignoring the first 10 chapters of the Bible? Does that mean I don't believe in Scripture, or I'm a heretic or something? Probably, all things considered, let's be honest, probably. But once again, I feel like I have to talk about the difference between something being true and something being fact, which is something that when you start studying the Bible in any real sort of intense academic way, you have to accept as possibility. Like, I do not personally believe that everything that happens in Scripture is 100% fact. Yet, that doesn't mean I don't believe that it's true, and that there's no slippery slope where suddenly I'm going to denounce all of Scripture as stupid and believe whatever I want to believe without any consideration because I questioned one chapter in the Bible as maybe being true and not fact. Like, it's a stupid argument. Why is the beginning of Genesis a poem? Why are there 2 creation stories that, if factually true, have slightly different facts in them in how the world was created? How can the world literally be created in 7 days if the sun and the moon weren't created until the 4th day? but we only measure a day as 24-hour periods because of the rotation of the sun and the moon. So yes, if the beginning of Genesis is literal, obviously that's a hard argument against evolution. But throughout generations, from eras before Jesus was even born, people have been talking about how Genesis is not literal. This isn't some new liberal idea that people just came up with to be like cool and relevant. It is an old, well-worn and accepted idea that millions upon millions of people have thought to be true for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So this brings me to the last thing I'm going to say, which is, if you are someone who is like maybe wondering or contemplating or sort of questioning your personal beliefs in evolution or creationism, I hope this video is helpful. Like, the hope would be that when presented with all the facts, you could make an informed decision for yourself. But if you're a hardcore creationist or a hardcore evolutionist, this video probably didn't even like make the needle wobble. Like, every criticism I had on your belief, you probably had a response locked and loaded, ready for me. Beliefs are hard to argue against in a personal way. If you're trying to convince someone to believe in a higher power using a creationism versus evolutionism debate, it's probably not going to convince them. Because your best argument is the 3-year-old that just yells like, God can do everything. But if someone is trying to figure out how the universe came to be and they want a real, true, hard facts coming in, swinging with this idea of God can do anything, is probably not going to convince them. Likewise, evolutionists, you're probably not going to convince creationists to give up on their God, their higher power, that thing behind all things, by using evolutionary facts. Because if you think facts beat belief, then the first hole they get to, you're not going to be able to answer it without dipping into the theories. But all those theories are theories. Even if you have an answer to every question they have, well, why couldn't God have just done that, though? Like, if you're arguing with anyone who believes that we're dealing with a supernatural entity that can do all things, how can you ever hope to prove that an all-powerful being didn't just use science to create all things? The point of this being that whether or not you believe in God or whether or not you believe in evolution, those two things aren't mutually opposed. And if you're trying to convince those around you to join you in your beliefs, it's probably not going to be super beneficial if they're really into their own beliefs. I have seen just so many people try and beat other people's beliefs down on both sides of this debate, and way too often it comes down to God can't exist because of evolution, or evolution can't exist because of God. And the arguments and the debates go nowhere because they're not compelling enough arguments on their own to discredit why the other person believes what they believe. If you're a creationist, you probably have a million little extra biblical arguments for all the weird things in the beginning of Genesis. Like, God created chickens as chickens, not as eggs. God created Adam as a man, not as a baby. So God could have created the earth as 1 billion years old and not as a new earth. And that old earth could have had the fossils in it, which is why there's fossils. Sure, okay. And if you're an evolutionist, you read something in the beginning of Genesis that just doesn't fit the facts that you know and believe in, and so you go, wow, there's evidence that the earth is billions of years old, and scripture says that the earth is maybe only 10,000 years old, so the Bible is wrong, ergo, God doesn't exist. Sure, okay. You know, or maybe, like just maybe, there's something more going on here. So like, that's what I got for you guys today. Like I've said in multiple previous videos, the point of these question videos is not to be the final word. We're not trying to tell you what to believe, but we're seeking to be the first word. We want to create videos that spark something in your minds and begin conversations in your life that lead to growth. So maybe you agree with what we've said, maybe you don't agree with what we've said. We'd love to talk to you more in depth about all of it if you want to talk with us. You can always be learning more or joining the conversation by checking out more stuff on my personal page at Brennan Johnson on YouTube or our Instagram page at The Co-Mutual. The Co-Mutual is a community of people started by my wife and me, where we gather with those who have been hurt or burnt by institutional religion to talk about spirituality and life in kind of a non-religious institutional setting. So thank you so much for watching. Grace and peace. Cheers. I think I'm going to try to drink it again because I just need coffee.